تعتبره من أهم المؤرخين وتثني عليه. يقول إن ولاية بوش الثانية يجب أن تظل في نفس الاتجاه الأساسي، تثبيت الأمن في عالم أكثر خطورة، إذ يعتبر أن استراتيجية بوش كاستراتيجية روزفلت أتت نتيجة صدمة هجوم مفاجئ ولن تتغير. أضف إلى ذلك يعتبر جاديس بوش بالإضافة إلى روزفلت وجون آدمز من أعظم الاستراتيجيين بين رجال الدولة الأمريكية. ما تعليقك ولكن باختصار شديد بروفيسور تشومسكي؟
I'm sorry, but I can't be concise. That's a very important book.
No.
John Lewis Gaddis is a leading American historian.
No.
He wrote the first book on the roots of George Bush's foreign policy, and he traces it back to John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State and President in 1818. And he's a good historian. He cites the right sources, but he doesn't tell you what they say. In my recent book, Failed States, I go over this and I report what they say. Adams lied to Congress, lied to the population, and as the scholarly history says, set the principle that other presidents have followed ever since, carrying out violent and aggressive wars, lying to Congress, lying to the population, and continuing on the principle that expansion is the path to security. Well, by now it means expansion over the world. Yeah. That's what the historical scholarly sources say. Gaddis cites them, but doesn't report their content.
هناك عناوين يعمل من خلالها ونسمعها كثيرا في خطاب المحافظين الجدد، في خطابات جورج بوش: إنهاء الاستبداد، الدفاع عن الحريات والعدل، تعزيز الديمقراطيات، الكرامة الإنسانية وحقوق الإنسان. لا يبدو بروفيسور تشومسكي أنك مؤمن بالمبادئ الشمولية العالمية إذا صح التعبير. لماذا؟ أليست هذه عناوين مهمة؟
Oh, I think the words are delightful. And you can hear the same words from every brutal, vicious aggressor in history. In fact, if you look through history, you may try, it's a good experiment, try to find any violent aggressor, even the worst monsters, and ask if their words weren't noble and uplifting. That's the reason why nobody with any sense pays a moment's attention to the rhetoric that comes from centers of power. The rhetoric from the centers of power is meaningless.
انطلاقا من هنا بروفيسور تشومسكي، السؤال الأخير فيما يتعلق بالسياسة الخارجية الأمريكية قبل أن أنتقل في المحور التالي إلى موضوع إيران، سوريا، العراق. من أين يجب البدء نحو مفهوم جديد للسياسة الخارجية الأمريكية؟ من أي نقطة يجب الانطلاق بروفيسور تشومسكي؟
Each case has to be considered in its own terms. There is no single formula.
ولكن كعقيدة عامة، كفكرة عامة، الانطلاق هو ماذا؟
Let's take Iraq.
نعم.
Okay. The United States and Britain invaded Iraq. The United States and Britain have been torturing the people of Iraq for decades. They both supported Saddam Hussein during his war against Iraq. They provided him with means to develop weapons of mass destruction. They supported him right through his worst atrocities against the Kurds, long after the war with Iran. They supported him again when he crushed the Shiite rebellion that might have overthrown him. They then imposed brutal sanctions, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, devastated the society, probably prevented the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. Then they invaded. They've turned a disaster into a monstrosity. They have only they have no rights whatsoever. Invading armies have no rights. They have responsibilities. Their responsibility is, first of all, to pay reparations for the atrocities they've committed. and secondly, to follow the will of the victims. Well, we know the will of the victims. The U.S. and British polls are taken regularly. The latest ones reveal that 87% of the people of Iraq want a firm timetable for withdrawal. 87% means almost all of Arab Iraq, where the troops are actually deployed. So yes, they want a firm timetable for withdrawal. Bush and Blair state they will not set a timetable for withdrawal. Okay, that means they reject the will of the people of Iraq. Of course, they refuse to pay reparations. The starting point in Iraq should be for the population of the countries themselves and the people of the world to compel them to live up to their responsibilities. Then we go on from there. Let's take Iran. Iran is now.
فلنتكلم عن المسألة الإيرانية في المحور التالي، ولكن ما دمنا نتحدث عن موضوع العراق بروفيسور تشومسكي، هناك نظرية أن ما يحصل اليوم في العراق بالرغم من مأساويته حقب لفترة انتقالية أساسية لبناء دولة عراقية. وهناك نظرية أساسية للمؤرخ تشارلز تيلي: War made the state and the state made the war. الحرب تصنع الدولة والدولة تصنع الحرب.
There's something to it. I mean, states are imposed and constructed by violence. Just about every state in the world achieved its present borders and its present character by violence and savagery. The state system was imposed on the world by violence. The contemporary state system evolved in Europe particularly. Europe for centuries was the most savage and violent place in the world for centuries. That was part of the internal fighting that finally created the state system. Well, those massive violent destructions ended in 1945, and they ended for a very simple reason. Europeans understood in 1945 that the next time they play the game of mutual slaughter, it'll be the end of the world, because they had created a level of violence which was going to destroy everything. So since 1945, Europe is at peace. But if you look at the centuries that lie behind, it's a century of extreme savagery and violence. In fact, the savagery and violence in imposing the state system in Europe is what created the culture of savagery and the technological means of savagery, which enabled Europe to conquer the world. As Europe conquered the world, it imposed state systems, every one of them with violence, savagery, and brutality, leaving a legacy which persists until today. If we look at the worst conflicts in the world today, they are the residue of the efforts of the European powers to impose state systems which had almost no relationship to the needs and interests of the people concerned. We can run through the conflicts in Africa, in South Asia, in the Middle East. Yes, that's what they are. Take, say, Iraq. Iraq was created by the British for their own interest, with boundaries that ensured that the oil of the north would be in the hands of Britain, not in the hands of Turkey. The Principality of Kuwait was established so that Iraq would essentially have no outlet to the sea, therefore would be dependent, and the boundaries were imposed by British power, not by the Iraqis. Look throughout the rest of the world and it's the same. So yes, the state system has been imposed and secured by extreme violence.
لحظات قليلة مع بريك إعلاني قبل أن أسأل